Enrichment, Enlightenment, Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cutler, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Here at Chabad of Cary, as well as those tuning in from all over the world. Thank you. And I know many people will be listening to this class later via download. So we say welcome to you right now. April 12th, 2016, and today's class will be about Passover. And unlike last week or most of the classes we do at Lunch and Learn that feature one topic and do it in depth, because it's the last week before Pesach, I said, you know what, let's do an overview. Let's go through Pesach fast pace, and feel free to ask questions along the way. I don't have anything I have to cover today. We can change gears in the middle if someone else has any other question that they want to ask. But we hope to do a lot in 45 minutes, both traditions, insights, Seder, so on and so forth. So let's begin. They tell the story of a guy who was coming across the border, and he's being checked by the customs. They're going through his car. And they see him with not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 sets of dishes, all right, in the car. 5 sets of dishes, and he's crossing the border, and the border police are saying, hey, you can't do this. You're obviously bringing goods over because you have 5 sets of dishes. He says, no, these are all for myself. I said, 5 sets? 5. He goes, why? He goes, well, I'm a Jew, pretty religious Jew, so this is my meat dishes, and then I have separate milk dishes. All right, but that only explains 2. He says, well, it's almost Passover time. So my 3rd set of dishes, I have special Passover dishes, and by now the custom person's like, let me guess, those are your Passover meats and those are your Passover milks. It's like, you're right. It's like, okay, but you're still 1 short. How do you explain the 5th one? Look, every now and then I like to have a cheeseburger.
We call that the treifadika.
Yeah, that's the treifadika one. And I like this joke because there's something beautiful about Passover, and I mentioned it briefly last week. Jews from all over are running. You said Earth's Fair, this store, that store, Pesach, Passover, they wouldn't be selling it if people didn't buy it. A study I saw said 40% of all kosher food all over the world is sold in this month. 40% of kosher food is sold this month, which shows us something very beautiful, that regardless of level of observance, people try to do more over the Passover season, and that's something very, very beautiful. It was 70 to 80% of Jews celebrate Pesach in some capacity, which is very, very nice. So let's go through the holiday very briefly. If you look in the Torah, is the holiday ever called the holiday of Passover?
No.
No. In the scriptures, in the 5 books of Moses, I think even in the other books, I don't believe it ever gets the name Passover. Who gave it the name Passover? We did. In the oral tradition and a lot of other places, it's called Chag HaPesach, the holiday of Pesach. What is the holiday called in the Bible? So that's our second name. On your handout, you'll see there's a couple names here. Chag HaMatzot. The holiday in the Torah is called Chag HaMatzot, the festival of matzahs. So throughout the Torah, it says you should celebrate the festival of matzahs. So if you want to know why matzah is so big, that's the name of the holiday biblically, Chag HaMatzos. But I'll share with you a beautiful insight on why would it be that the Torah calls it Chag HaMatzot, but we call it Chag HaPesach. We Jewish people call it Passover because who are we praising? Who are we thanking when we call it Passover? God, right? God, you saved us. And when there was the last plague in Egypt, and all the firstborn died, you passed over the Jewish homes, hence the name Pesach. Pesach means to leap. It means to pass over. So it was us sort of praising God, their words of endearment of the way God saved us. However, God calls the holiday in the Torah a name that praises us. Why? So notice a beautiful verse in Jeremiah. Why don't you read this one just right afterwards?
I remember to you the loving kindness of your youth, the love of your wedding. You followed me in the desert, in a land not sown.
That's in Jeremiah. God says, I remember that you followed me into a desert with nothing save some lousy matzahs. So we followed God into the wilderness, Moses, but God, we don't give enough credit to the Jewish people. Sometimes we always complain about them fetching and complaining in the desert. Do you realize that they marched destination unknown, very little provisions? So when God calls it Chag HaMatzahs, he's praising us. It's almost like two spouses that are each praising the other. We, the Jewish people, call it Chag HaPesach, praising God. God calls it Chag HaMatzahs, praising our faith in the fact that we ran out into the desert with very little provisions, trusting God. Beautiful insight. Now, I should note that Pesach doesn't just mean Passover in the literal sense of God jumping over the homes, but it has a more mystical meaning as well. And what is that? It's the holiday that gives us the ability to pass over, to leap over obstacles. The same way when the Jews were imprisoned, God shut them out of Egypt. It is a holiday we are given a spiritual gift of freedom. Freedom means not being limited, not being restricted, not being tied up by those things that normally keep us chained up. Okay? So if every holiday gives us a gift, and Rosh Hashanah is renewal, and Yom Kippur is atonement, and Shavuot is Torah, what is the spiritual gift of Passover?
Freedom.
It's freedom. It's freedom. So it means freedom in a very literal sense, that thank God we are free. It's something to appreciate it. It means freedom in a literal sense. We want to make other people free, because the sign of a true person, free person, is someone who wants to make others free as well. But it is also freedom in a spiritual sense, to get past, to leap over, not to walk, but to leap over, to jump over, to pass over things that otherwise limit us. We can call them habits, we can call them addictions, we can call them whatever we want, but we all have those things that tie us down. So I'm going to go around the room and everyone, no, I'm kidding. And everyone will say what their personal Egypt is, but that's what you're supposed to do over the Passover. You're supposed to identify what is my Egypt. Another word would even be my comfort zone, those areas that I don't like getting out of. And just one more moment about this idea. So God took us out of Egypt and we were free. But later the Jewish people were imprisoned plenty of other times. We had other exiles later on. So was it a temporary freedom or was it a permanent freedom that we were given? What about, so the mystics say something beautiful, that at the festival of Passover, God gave us essential freedom. And what that means is, even if later in history, someone does imprison us, all they can do is imprison our bodies and not our souls. And that's a profound idea. The notion that notwithstanding anything that's going on in life, there's a place inside of me that is free. That's a gift that was given to us. Feel free to chime in if anyone has any, comments about yeah.
You had given an example of during the Holocaust, there were people who would sneak to get together to have I forgot which holiday it was.
Sukkot or Passover, one of the two, yeah.
And so they they didn't have a Haggadah, but they just from what they remembered, and so they internally were still feeling.
And that's the idea. What were they trying to show? That no matter what you do to our bodies, you cannot make us animals. I mean, that's unfortunately what the Germans were hoping to do. Give you a number, make you just a robot, a machine, less than human. And the notion that no matter what's going on in life, there's a place in me that's free, that's a Passover gift to the whole world. To the whole world. And there are other examples of this. I was reading a beautiful blog this morning by an inspiration of mine. His name is Rabbi Yitzi Horowitz. You've heard of him before. I've mentioned him before. He's a Chabad rabbi who was diagnosed 3 years ago with ALS, which is as horrific a disease as there can be. And he blogged this morning about when he was first told the news. You know, for a period of time, he was having difficulties moving his mouth in certain ways. His voice was being lost. He didn't know what it was. Thought it was laryngitis, one thing after another. High holiday time, he couldn't speak well. It took months before they finally gave him that diagnosis, which is a death sentence, we know, and even worse because it's slow. And he says he gets that, and he didn't even know at the time the full extent of what it is. And he's in the hallway. You need to read this article. He's in the hallway of the doctor's office, breaks down crying. And on his way out, he sees a man who just suffered a seizure. And he runs and he helps him out. I mean, he's still, again, 95% operating at that time, you know. And he runs and he helps him out and he takes care of him and this and that. And he goes, apparently this was a sign that I can still be useful. And that's what he's dedicated his life to the last 3 years. Today, all he can do is smile, and he blogs via computer that he moves his eyes to which letter he wants to write, and he gives Torah thoughts. He has a blog. It takes him hours and hours to produce a single thing. And he's still being an inspiration to hundreds and thousands. So that's an extreme example. But here is someone who's saying, I am in prison. My body is absolutely in prison. I'm not going to let that shackle me. And that's a gift of freedom. Really quickly, there's two other names of Passover as well. One is called Chag HaAviv, the holiday of Aviv. What is Aviv? The month of spring. So the festival of spring, and the Torah calls it that as well. We mentioned it last week. That is why we have a Torah directive to ensure that Passover falls out in spring, because of that name. Celebrate Chag HaAviv, the holiday in spring. It can't be in winter. And finally, the last name is the name that we call it in all of our prayers. In our prayers, we don't say Chag HaMatzot or Chag HaPesach. We say Zman Cherutenu. Zman means the time, Cherutenu, of our freedom. So those are the four names of Passover: the holiday of Passover, the holiday of Matzahs, the holiday of spring, and the time of our freedom. All four are names given. Okay. We mentioned last week how there's many parts of Passover that are biblical, many other parts are only rabbinic or customs. Here's actually a complete list. I should note, though, that the Torah dedicates more real estate to Passover than any other holiday, by far. By far. Something like Yom Kippur. What does the Torah say about Yom Kippur? What actually is in the Torah, besides for the temple times? But what does it say about...
Practice self-denial.
Yeah. Right? Afflict yourself.
Right.
And it's a day of atonement. That is all the Torah tells us. Afflict yourself, and rabbinic tradition tells us that means fasting. And it's a day of atonement. So much else is rabbinic. Kol Nidre, and this, that. Pesach. Last week I said we have a lot that's rabbinic and a lot that's customs, but what I didn't realize until I looked this up is there's a lot that is biblical in terms of how much space the Torah designates to it. So these are the biblical commands of Passover. Really quickly, to rest on the first day. The first day this year is Shabbat, so that works out well. And a lot of times in the Torah, things are in a positive and in a negative. So one is to rest, two is not to do prohibitive labor.
That's actually in the Torah?
Yeah. And then to rest on the seventh day, and not do prohibited labor on the seventh day of Passover. Why is the biblical Passover 7 days? I think, did I say it last week? Mm-hmm. Why 7 days?
7 years.
So it's a cycle. 7's always a cycle, but...
Took God 7 days to create the earth. No?
7 days, 7 days. So, but why? So, but in the Passover Exodus narrative, the Jews leave on the first day of Passover. Let's rewind. The eve of the day they leave, they're told to take the Paschal offering. Okay. That night they're told to eat the lamb and matzah and maror and put the blood on the door. There we go.
Okay.
Midnight that night, Pharaoh says, "Get out of here." Then the Jews leave that day. The Jews leave and are marching, as we said, destination unknowns for days 1, 2, and 3. Day 4, Pharaoh changes his mind. He chases after them 4, 5, and 6, and the showdown at the Reed Sea is on day 7. So that's why it's a 7-day holiday, and that's why the holiday portions of the day is the first day and the seventh day, and then there's the intermediate days that you still eat the matzah and don't eat the chametz, but there's not the prohibitions of labor. That's just the timeline. Yes?
These three paragraphs seem to contradict what you said last week about only three commandments.
I was referring to the Seder specifically. Last week I was talking about the Seder. It's only the telling over the story in matzah that's biblical. But there's general holiday things that are biblical. That's A. And B is, you're right, until I looked this up, I didn't realize the full extent of all the biblical mitzvot. You're right. So that's why. Okay. There's a whole lots of mitzvot that have to do with chametz and matzah. Look at this.
7 and 8 seem awfully close together.
Correct. So just look at these for a moment. 7 is don't eat chametz. And 8 is, it says don't even eat ta'aruvot of chametz. And it's, ta'aruvot means mixtures of chametz. And to explain that, usually in Torah, if you have a little bit of a forbidden substance and it's mixed into a lot of a permissible substance, there's a rule that the little bit can become nullified.
It's 170.
1 in 60 is one ratio. Now, that's not to say you specifically put a little bit of ham into your thing for seasoning. That's not what I'm suggesting here. But if an accident happens, there are times where even in Jewish law and halacha, there's a 1 in 60 rule. When it comes to chametz, even the smallest amount of chametz is not allowed. And that is why we are far more strict about chametz than other things. So the three ways in which chametz is different than bacon year-round is that even the smallest amount is not allowed. That's A. B is, the Torah not only says you shouldn't eat it, but you shouldn't even see or find it in your domain. You notice 9 and 10? Are you sharing? You see?
Mm.
So that's something unique. The Torah doesn't say you shouldn't have bacon in your home. Now, it doesn't say that. Nowhere does the Torah also say we got to go on a hunt looking for bacon. What the Torah does say, though, is on the day before Passover, we're supposed to destroy our chametz. So we see a new level of severity with chametz, unlike any other forbidden substance in Torah. Just something interesting. So now you'll also notice mitzvah number 5 is interesting. There's a separate command, don't eat chametz on the eve of Passover. After a certain time of day.
Yep.
In the afternoon. Where does that come from?
Well, it takes a certain amount of time to go through us.
Oh, that's
And
interesting.
so technically you still find it in
You
your
still be
domain,
digesting it?
yeah.
Okay. So the Torah, though, actually, when it says that, it says, at the time you are slaughtering your lamb, don't be eating chametz. Now, today we don't slaughter our lamb on the eve of Passover. But that time of day, afternoon, we are still not eating chametz. So if you pick up that Passover guide that we have here, that Soul Wise magazine, you'll probably, or any Chabad publication, you'll notice the time, stop eating chametz by 12:08 p.m. I don't know what it is, but there's a certain time, anytime afternoon, and I don't want to be confusing, but afternoon doesn't always mean 12. Remember that? Afternoon is half of the daylight hours of the day.
Oh, right.
So from that time on, we don't do chametz. Okay, so we don't see it in your house, we don't find it in your house.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
If you sell your chametz,
Good.
it's still in your domicile, it's still in your house, so how, I mean, they get around it by you don't own it, you sold it.
So let's talk a little bit about selling chametz. It's an odd ritual that, where did it come? Anyone know where it came from? Okay.
Let's just go on.
Okay, So back in the day, first of all, people didn't have pantries. They had a very limited amount of produce, and it was very easy just to say, get rid of your food before Passover. I mean, that's it. I mean, I don't think you had frozen foods. I guess you had storage houses of flour. That you did have, right? So typically people would do, there was two things. There was chametz that you knew about and you would get rid of it. And there's chametz that you don't know about. It could be hiding somewhere and you don't know about it. And to that, the Jewish tradition was announce that I don't want it anymore. Announce that it is considered in Hebrew hefker. Hefker means ownerless. And that is a legal thing. If you would go on the street and say, hey, this diamond ring is hefker, it's another way of saying, finders keepers, and you throw it up, and I'm now removing my ownership from it. So that is, and I'm going to get to selling in a moment, Marty, but that is over here, if you go to the second page, on the eve of Passover, before afternoon, one is supposed to say those lines in big letters. All leaven and anything which is in my possession, whether I've seen it or not, whether I've observed it or not, whether I removed it or not, should be considered nullified and ownerless like the dust of the earth. That is the line that you are supposed to say seriously. In fact, you're not supposed to say it in Hebrew. You should say it in, unless you understand Hebrew. This is not a prayer. This is a
Personal statement.
correct personal statement. It doesn't do much good if you don't mean it, right? Okay. So technically speaking, this is enough. The problem is, if you say this, but then you're at the same time hiding chametz in your house, how genuine is this? If you really mean it, you really should separate yourselves from it. So back in the day, this was only for the chametz that you did not know about. You couldn't say this for chametz that you know about and are hiding, because then it's not a genuine statement. Is that making sense? To render it ownerless, I can make a crumb in my house ownerless. I don't want it. I truly don't want it. Or any other chametz that I don't know where it is.
But a bag of flour would be pretty valuable.
Correct. So that you would have to get rid of before Passover. Now, the Talmud discusses what happens if someone is on a boat, let's say March time, and they get in a little bit of all of a sudden there's a storm, and they find themselves on a boat. It's like, oh no, Passover is coming. I'm not going to be home in time. No email, no phone calls. Oh yeah, have a whole house full of chametz. What should I do? So it was for those circumstances, Marty, that they recommended this procedure of selling it to someone who is not Jewish. It was originally in a very extreme circumstance. Someone found themselves in a situation that did not allow them to go home and properly take care of their chametz. That is the first source for selling chametz.
But how did they get the message back?
Well, you
It was
like
a
sell
legal
it to the,
sale.
sell it to the
Right.
captain.
Yeah.
It was a boy.
They would sell it.
gotcha.
Yeah, they
In
would.
your absence,
Yeah.
gotcha. Okay.
They would be on the boat. Someone here, buy my.
Gotcha. Sorry. Okay. Good point.
Fast forward in history, Jews entered a industry, as Hal said, the liquor industry. And the liquor industry was not easy because liquor, most liquor at least, other than wine and maybe some tequila, but everything else is made out of fermented barley grain, found themselves with huge amounts of inventory that they could not get rid of before Passover. And it was at that time in history where they took, Marty, this idea which up until then was only used in extreme circumstances, and said you can sell your business, sell your chametz to people to non-Jews during the duration of the holiday. And in fact, we know of stories where there was a whole town of non-Jews that said, hey, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to buy it because then he's going to have to render it ownerless and then we'll be able to take it. There are stories like that in history that have happened, but we'll save that. Fast forward in history, then at that point, it became more common to do it for other chametz that you didn't want to get rid of and you didn't want to render ownerless. Are there some people, even today, even amongst religious Jews, who don't like this? Yes, there is. There is a group of people who do not sell chametz, real chametz. But nonetheless, it is a tradition that's spread amongst Jews, and it is a way, legal, it is a real legal sale, believe it or not, it's not just signing your name to, it's a real legal sale that, theoretically speaking, if someone were to come into your house, if you saw your chametz and start taking away, you would have no right to protest. But you are supposed to do it in an area that is locked up, going back to your question. So what you do is, let's say, in our house we have a pantry. So that pantry we're going to mark off, seal off before Passover begins. We're putting all our chametz over here that we know about but don't want to get rid of. And the same perhaps with one freezer. So again, there's three ways we get rid of chametz. Chametz that we don't know about, what do? We say that we nullify with this prayer. Chametz that we know about and want to get rid of, we get rid of it before Passover. And finally, the chametz that we know about and don't want to get rid of, that is where the sale is, and that is the form that you can do all over today. Questions? Yeah.
The grains that become the chametz.
Let's do that. Good.
And this is obviously a springtime holiday. So if the crop started to grow, to grow, and Is that, what happens with that?
So let's explain this. So I have
the crop, will it still crop?
It's, if it, oh, it's on here? I didn't
yeah.
even.
Well, we didn't go there yet. So
Oh, sorry.
so we did the prohibitions of chametz. We have the positive mitzvahs of eating matzah and telling over the story. You'll notice when it says to relate the Exodus story that night, number 12, it says that part of the mitzvah is you have to tell it over in detail, because throughout the year we're always supposed to remember the Exodus story. So what makes Passover different? In detail, and if you have children, that's a key part of the mitzvah. Okay.
13.
Oh, so 13 I didn't realize as well. When it says you should remember the Shabbat day and keep it holy, that is a reference to Kiddush, sanctifying and announcing the day's holiness for Kiddush, and by extension holidays as well. So the first of the 4 cups is actually biblical. I didn't realize that last week. Because the first of the 4 cups is Kiddush, that is biblical, the other one's a tradition. Let's have a working definition for chametz over here. The Torah identifies 5 different types of grain that could make something chametz. This is oral tradition. What are the big 5? Anyone want to guess?
Wheat,
Wheat, barley, rye, oat. Good, not bad. And spelt. Good. Oh, you saw that on the oh, you learned it in school? Okay, fine.
Excellent.
What is actually interesting is the 5 types of grains that can be chametz are the same types of grains that you need to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. I'll say that again. You can only do the mitzvah of matzah with a type of grain that theoretically would be chametz if it wasn't made according to the specifications of matzah. In other words, can you make corn matzah?
Yes, just not for Passover.
Okay, but you would not fulfill the obligation of Passover with corn matzah.
But you are allowed to eat it.
Yeah, okay, but
Well, maybe.
let's get to that in a moment. So the definition of chametz is one of these 5 grains once it is detached and comes in contact with water.
Okay.
So when it's detached and comes into contact with water, at that point, unless you quickly turn it into matzah, traditionally it's an 18-minute process. Have you heard of that? 18 minutes?
No, but it makes complete sense.
It's high enough.
That's right.
So 18 minutes from the moment water and flour touch, and during those 18 minutes, you do not let it sit there. You're always beating it, working it. And if you go into an old-fashioned matzah bakery, the place is they're working very fast, and everyone's pounding away at that dough. After 18 minutes, it becomes, or obviously, if it's less than 18 minutes, but you were to add yeast to it, that is a leavening agent, and that would be instantaneously chametz. I mean, today's yeast is just what? What's today's yeast? It's some fungus. What is it? What is
No,
it?
it's yeast.
Yeah, it's something live.
It's alive.
Yeah.
Bacteria.
So yeast itself is not really chametz, right? But yeast makes something chametz. Right? If you add a little bit of yeast to any flour and water mixture, that will instantly become chametz.
Because it rises.
It rises even sooner than the 18 minutes that's typically said. In the old days, there was a different type of yeast they used. It's interesting. They would take, when they baked bread, they would leave a little bit of the dough. You familiar with this, Jersey? They would just let that dough get really, really chametzy, really, really sourdough. The old sourdough, and they would use that as a leavening agent in all of future breads that they baked.
So they knew about
Yeah,
penicillin
and we still do
before
that with
they realized
sourdough.
it.
What?
Sourdough, you'll have the mother dough or
You
something
get
it's called.
It's a starter,
Yeah.
Call
A starter.
it
Yeah.
a friendship bread.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, that's a kind of it.
But I say this because whenever you look in the Exodus story, Exodus chapter 12 will say you can't have any chametz or se'ar. Chametz is what we do. Se'ar is always translated as yeast, but really it's sourdough. That's what it is, sourdough. So that is what chametz is, one of these 5 grains that's not made according to the specifications of matzah. But according to Torah, it's only these 5. If you make a grain out of anything else, it's not chametz. And that is why your Passover cakes at the store that you see for sale are made out of one of 2 things. What are they made out of?
Matzah meal.
So either Once matzah is already made,
Yeah.
it's no longer chametz. It's made into matzah. You can do whatever you want with it. So they will actually put it in the food processor, turn it into powder, and then bake with it.
Right.
Okay?
Or potato starch.
Or potato starch. Now, interesting, just an extra stringency that some people have. We don't use matzah meal on Passover. We actually don't. We actually don't use matzah meal on Passover. And the reason for that is, especially with shmura matzah, the way it's baked super, super fast, is it's not impossible that there was a pocket of flour that somehow remained not cooked well. So you knead it super fast, you cook it super fast. Every now and then you'll even see a little bubble or something like that in the matzah itself. So out of the worry that maybe there was a little bit of the matzah that remained unbaked, and then you were to put it in the food processor, but what's in there?
Water.
A little bit of, then you have flour and water. Now that's just a stringency some Chabad, some people have. Typically it's totally kosher for Passover if it has an OUP. But if you ever notice, like even at our Seder, you'll see the Passover cakes that we'll have will be made with potato starch, and that's totally okay. There is a term over here you'll notice here called kitniyot. Kitniyot, very briefly, is corn and rice. Corn and rice are not chametz. Corn and rice are not chametz. They're not one of the five grains.
But peas are also
And-
part of that.
So,
Besides corn
and
rice.
types of peas are also part of that. And where that came from is in Ashkenazi Judaism, which would be Poland and Germany and Russia, those regions. For some reason, there was confusion some years. I'll tell you, this was where it started. Some say it could have been because of crop rotation, and they were planting in the fields different crops. So as they were harvesting their corn and rice, there were little bits of grain there mixed in. Maybe it was in the storage houses they were confusing the two. Maybe it was they turned it into bread and they were confusing the two. But whatever the case is, they made a decree that you shouldn't have rice and beans, rice, corn, and certain beans on Passover either. That's called kitniyot. That's the term. And I'll say it's not chametz. It's not chametz. Many Jews stayed away from it. It is not, again, it's not biblical, and it's not even, Marty, the reason why there's differences between Ashkenazim and Sephardim is any decree that was accepted by all of the Jews in the times of the Talmud, 1800 years ago, that more or less became universal. Anything after that period of time was regional or dependent on the community, so on and so forth. This kitniyot thing's only 1,000 years old.
Well, less than that. It's about-
Less than that?
I think it was the 1300s.
1300s.
When I read it, there was a rabbi in the 12 or 1300s, a French rabbi, who determined that was the case, and the other rabbis in the area said he was crazy, but over time it became a tradition.
But in Sephardim never accepted it.
Right.
Sephardim, if you lived in, and to today, you'll be at even very, very religious Israelis or Yemenites or Spanish Jews, and they will have their rice and their beans, So I still like, even for those people that don't eat it, I like pointing out there's a difference. It's not chametz, it is kitniyot. And as such, even those that are careful don't have to be as careful when it comes to dishes and this and that, because it's not going chametz. Let's go much further. Chametz means leaven, or kitniyot, that's that term, rice, beans.
Okay.
So every now and then you'll actually see at the store, like OUP, but made with, you know what? It could be that the OU doesn't put an OUP if it's kitniyot. It could be. I'm not sure about that. Typically, it will say made with kitniyot on it, but that's the term in Hebrew, kitniyot. Okay. Going further, let's go just mystically for a moment. It's very interesting that chametz and matzah are spelled with the exact same letters in Hebrew. We're on the second side here. They both have a chet. They both have a tzaddik. The only difference is one has a hey and one has a chet. So look for a moment between the difference between a hey and a chet, and they're almost identical. See that? So two items that are so different have the same spelling except for a centimeter. Now I know that the letters are also in different orders, but putting that aside. So what is the meaning of this? So the Rebbe explains, you've heard this before, that what does chametz represent spiritually and psychologically? What does it represent? Rising. What does rising represent?
Freedom.
No.
Ego.
Ego.
Oh,
Being full of hot air, You heard that expression?
Rabbi,
Yes.
Debbie is saying it is our pride that we are destroying. Chametz. Removing leavening, being puffed up.
Correct.
Said humans are strange. We can be blind. We have mystical powers to lose our senses when we want, consciously and unconsciously. And she adds, "Hi, Rivka." And then as far as chametz, I mean, grammatically, what is it coming from?
I don't know. You can maybe tell me better.
Chamutz. What's
Which means?
chamutz?
Vinegar?
Sour.
Sour. Interesting.
Chamutz is sour. Chametz is the what do you call it? Like the root of the word.
Interesting.
Chet mem tzadik. So it is sour, sourdough.
Sourdough. And when do we humans become sour? When our pride gets to us. That's when it is. That's when we become sour. Someone that is otherwise so amazing and so beautiful, but we get too full of our hot air and we're lacking the humility. And even so, in relationship to other people, it's arrogance and it can be to God too. So Passover is the holiday of humility and of faith, and the two go together. And I think I control the whole world. I'm full of myself. Where do I make room for God? And the Rebbe explains, even mystically, the difference between the het and the hay and the chet is the hay has a little escape hatchet up there. It means you're open to something greater than yourself, other people and God. And notice the chet has nowhere to go, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger like the balloon. And spiritually, before Passover, it's a holiday where we're trying to remove the chametz. And that is why, going back to the physical tradition of the eve of chametz, the eve of Passover, I said you say this prayer and you annul your chametz. There's a beautiful prayer that is anyone that is in Chabad says it, and any Sephardim say it. Anyone that is more mystically inclined, their tradition, their liturgy, reads this prayer. It's a beautiful prayer. Marty, you want to read it at the bottom? The prayer when burning chametz.
May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our fathers, that just as I remove the chametz from my house and from my possessions, so shall you remove all the extraneous forces. Remove the spirit of impurity from the earth, remove our evil inclination from us, and grant us a heart of flesh to serve you in truth. Make all the sitra achara,
Okay, that's a Kabbalah word. Okay, keep on
all
going.
the kelipat,
Yeah.
and all wickedness be consumed in smoke, and remove the dominion of evil from the earth. Remove with a spirit of destruction and a spirit of judgment all that distress the Shekinah, just as you destroyed Egypt and its idols in those days at this time. Amen. Selah.
So we're saying, just as I'm physically, have you seen this prayer before? Just as I'm physically removing the chametz from my home, help me remove the chametz inside of me. And give me a heart of flesh. The meaning of that is a heart of flesh as opposed to
Heart of stone like
Correct.
Pharaoh's.
Stone-like. Make me have more sensitivity, openness to other people and to God. Sensitivity. So this is a beautiful prayer that we're asking Hashem that I want to remove the chametz from me. And B is, God, help us out a little bit in this world to, it doesn't have to be with the 10 plagues, but it would help. If the spirit of impurity and the evil in the world were to weaken just a little bit. Sometimes it's so frustrating to look at the world in a world of evil, and we're asking Hashem to help remove the dominion of evil from the earth. Yeah.
Pleasure. The older Haggadahs, like I was a kid, it was the Maxwell House Haggadah.
Yeah.
But it had nothing spiritual about it. It was just telling the story. So it's the more recent Haggadahs, and I guess as long as they follow the structure, it's okay, that really bring in the spiritual side. Is there a reason that
So
it
it's the
never-
same Haggadah, they just have so much commentary today. So the Maxwell House Haggadah
Right,
was just a literal translation with nothing else.
right.
There was no commentary, there were no stories, there was nothing else to make it a more spiritual experience.
What is the story of the rabbis up all night? and stuff
But
like
that's
that, right?
the traditional text.
Right, it
There was no
traditional text,
commentary.
Right.
And there, for hundreds of years, there have been many versions of the Haggadah with tons of commentary. But the ones that American Jews typically used, you're right, until more recent,
Right.
were more literal. And the truth is, and this is very important, the mitzvah of the night is to tell over the story in a way that is real, in a way that is meaningful. Go for a moment to fast forward, just when you, to the last page I have over here, Magid telling over the story. This is from Sri Freeman, but it's very cute. You're not limited to the Haggadah's version. That was written so that everyone would have something to say. But now is your chance to get creative. Tell every story you know about the Exodus. Examine the words of the Haggadah for deeper meaning. Make it real, make it profound. Basic rules, get the kids involved. Tell it in first person. Don't say, long ago, the ancient Hebrews, when we were once slaves to Egypt, but make it relevant and current and contemporary. That is an important part of it. And speak about miracles. So, Marty, absolutely, you need to make it real and relevant to fulfill the mitzvah. This is our guide, but we're supposed to make it real and relevant.
The prayer.
Yes, this prayer.
Kelpot is the husk.
Kelipot means the husks that conceal the truth.
And
Sitra achara means the other side. It sounds like Star Wars here, but the other side means anything other than holiness. Anything other than holiness, anything other than godliness. Okay.
And what is Sitra? I know you said it was.
Sitra achara means the other side. It means forces of unholiness. Now in Judaism, again, there's no independent evil that has its own God, but evil is a husk that hides truth.
This is like
A
Adam
prayer
and
to be
fell.
said as you burn the chametz traditionally, but even if you are not burning it, you just say the all leavened and anything leavened in my possession. This is what you would say Friday morning next week. You would say both of these prayers.
But Calipot, that's evil, right?
It means
more than
husks.
husk. What does
Things
it
that hide over reality.
So the husk is around the corn.
Correct.
So
Correct.
a corn husk.
It's
Fine.
around,
the corn.
it's around us, preventing us to really absorb the light of God. We put
It's like a
husk
box.
around us.
Correct, correct.
Our ego.
Box, yeah.
All right, and I think because of time, we're going to have to stop it in a moment. But just going through the Seder, everyone's familiar with the 14 steps of the Seder. Every part has a body and soul. And I guess, Marty, for years, everyone just focused on the body of each of the steps, the to-do, the how-to. And the how-to is important, but there's the soul of each step as well. So I like the same way we have body and soul, the Seder has body and soul. The body of the first one is Kadesh. It's pretty simple. You fill up a cup of wine. There is a tradition, by the way, to have someone else fill your cup each time. Why do you think?
We're Japanese.
No,
Yeah.
it's a royalty thing. It's a royalty thing. Have a waiter. But you do it to someone else. You don't need an official waiter.
The
But
Japanese
you
got it
say,
from us.
hey, Hal, do you mind filling up my cup of wine? That's what you do. Hal.
But not, do you mind drinking my cup?
Yeah.
Just filling it up.
Important for the 4 cups of wine part of the body is you're actually supposed to drink 4 cups of wine on one sitting. So when it says you drink the wine then. If you want to sip wine throughout the Seder, you're welcome to, but that's not drinking 4 cups of wine. It's drinking it in one shot. And each one doesn't have to be big. It's a couple ounces. 86 milliliters is the halachic amount. And there is a tradition to lean to the left. Not politically, you can do that.
Does it have to
That was-
be, does it have to be red wine?
Oh, interesting. Red wine versus white wine. So in Jewish tradition, it does say that if it's a toss-up, red is preferable because of, again, the blood and the things like that. However, if the wine is superior, use wine. White.
Everything's superior to the Malaga, right?
It also says something very sad in Jewish tradition. That is, if it's dangerous to use red wine, use white wine. If you go to the Talmud or the Code of Jewish Law, and it says if it's dangerous,
Because of blood libel, yeah.
can you imagine that's in our text? Because Passover was historically a dangerous time for Jews. People made libels, sadly. Have you heard of blood libels, they were called? That Jews did horrible libels that Jews murdered the blood of a non-Jew and mixed it into the matzah. So anything red was a no-go. It could arouse suspicion. So it actually says in the Code of Jewish Law to use white. Yeah.
I also read that was one of the reasons they opened the door for
Elijah.
Really?
Eliyahu, that
To make sure no one-
to show that there was nothing going on inside.
I've never. Wow.
Interesting.
Yes.
That reminded me, I knew somebody once that would not drink wine at Passover because he was diabetic. Is
Absolutely.
that where that root came from?
No, health comes first, and both physical health as well as if someone, God forbid, had an addiction. They should for sure, any grape juice all the way. I said last week, if you just prefer grape juice, it's nice tonight to have wine. There is but if someone struggles in any way with addiction, absolutely grape juice or something else. This is a nice little guide. I'm going to stop here because of time, but it goes through some of the steps of Kadesh and Orchatz, and what it is physically and what it is spiritually. So just for instance, the first one, it's to make Kiddush. But what is the soul of Kaddish? Holy in Hebrew means to separate yourself, right? We separate ourselves. The first stage of the Passover Seder is to transcend. It's, hey, get yourself into a mode where you're willing to be touched. Step out of the regular day and enter into an arena where things are going to touch me. I'm in a holy space tonight. So that would be the soul of Kaddish, and so on for all the other stories as well. I'll finish with one last thought. There's an interesting time of the Seder where we say, whoever is poor, come inside. We invite anyone to be our guests for Passover. And what's odd is we open up the telling over the story with this prayer, but wouldn't it make more sense to say that prayer before you even start the whole evening? It says, whoever is poor, come and eat. You invite everyone in. And then it says, we were once slave to Egypt, and today we're free. That's more or less the gist of that Helach Manya prayer. Why are we saying it now, not at the beginning of the Seder?
Well,
So here's where
I don't think that, it doesn't mean you are not
Correct.
going out and inviting and saying beforehand. It's just that you're proclaiming at the beginning of the service.
Correct. Okay, that is true.
If I missed any.
But if I missed anyone, and why are we proclaiming it now? And I'll finish with this nice, again, not just the Maxwell House edition, but the insights. And I recommend everyone to buy one good Haggadah with insights. It adds so much. And to spend time before Pesach reading it, to share with your family on Pesach. And that is, we're about to say we're free. What is the definition of someone who is free? Someone who can help out other people. Okay? That is our definition of freedom. Someone who's free wants other people to be free. One of the saddest parts about being a slave is not being in the position often to be able to be of help to other people. The way we celebrate our freedom, we were once slaves to Pharaoh. Now we are free. Whoever is hungry, come and eat. Those two ideas actually go hand in hand.
Obviously, he never heard Janis Joplin.
All right.
Nothing left to lose.
We will hold it here, everyone.
He's a big help. Now I've got to change my teaching for the meditation class.
You're tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, My Life, My Will with Gisela DiCarlo, The Tanya Love Show, Health Then with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Triangle Be Well with Howard Jacobson, Lunch and Learn with Rabbi Yisrael Cutler, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, Parent Dome with Ryan Miller, Current Affairs with Amnon Nissan. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section on nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Atomos.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.